I remember being at the point where I was in for 2.5 million. I remember looking in the mirror one morning at 2.5 million, continuing to make losses, going, what the fuck am I doing? What's going on here? But inherently, I believed in it because we had something that was very special that no one else was doing. And it was not only no one else was doing, it was difficult to do. And the fact that it's difficult to do makes it, in some ways, that much better.
Hi everyone, I'm your host Rohit Bhargava, and you are listening to episode 199 of the Startup Playbook podcast, a weekly series where I sit down with successful tech founders, investors, and operators to unpack their journey, lessons, and insights to help current and future entrepreneurs. The voice that you heard a little bit earlier was that of our guest for this episode, Jaimie Fuller. Jaimie has had a fascinating career to date, but he's best known as a former CEO and executive chairman of compression apparel company Skins. Skins was a global phenomenon used by elite athletes and sporting teams all over the world before eventually filing for bankruptcy in 2019. Jaimie is now back with his latest company, EO Labs, which uses innovation to help accelerate human progress through sport. In this interview, we covered a range of topics, including the ups and downs of the Skins journey, how he personally dealt with the fallout from filing for bankruptcy, how Skins was able to use brand to build a premium offering and compete with the likes of Nike all over the world, the vision and mission behind EO Labs, and much more. Without further ado, here is my interview with Jaimie Fuller. Hi Jaimie, welcome to the Startup Playbook podcast, and thanks so much for taking the time to be on the show today.
Thanks, Rob. My pleasure.
So Jaimie, incredible background, but for those people that may not be as familiar with your story, do you want to share a little bit about your background and what got you here today?
So I guess the main driver about being here today is in my last business experience, I created and owned the sportswear brand Skins. I didn't start the concept. It wasn't my initial concept. I basically bought it and took it over from the guy who originally did. And it was only a one-trick pony at that stage. And frankly, the operation of the business was broke. So I came in, supercharged it with some money, changed a bunch of stuff, and rode the luck wave. Did some awesome stuff that was fabulously successful. Did some completely disastrous stuff that was a fucking nightmare. But massive learning experience, incredible journey, life journey. And so that sort of got me into the world of elite sport and the commercial side of brand creation, brand building within elite sport, and how you then parlay that into engagement at the serious amateur level or weekend warrior. And then post the Skins life, we've started a new business called EO, which is the same principle but a much broader and a much stronger and a far more innovative basis than Skins ever was.
Yeah. And obviously, as you mentioned, so many parts of both your Skin story. Obviously love what you're doing with EO as well and keen to get into that. But maybe just as a starting point, looking into your background, Skins wasn't the first business that you started. From what I understand, you had a pretty successful operation in the printing space.
Yeah, again, ups and downs. So I'll go back even further. After school, I went to Sydney University, 1983, to study computer science.
Right.
And one semester in, 3 days before the first semester exams, I took the great decision that there was no future in computers and I wanted to get into print manufacturing. Yep. I come from a very long line of printers, right? Not physically printers, but owners of printing businesses. So it was a little bit like I felt it was in the blood. So I went into the family printing business and I joined the company with 6 employees. So that was 1984. And when we went bust in 1997, we had 320 employees. Oh. Yeah, it was a enormous growth journey that was incredibly enlightening and challenging. And I think, probably if you ask me, I think 250 is the maximum that we should have had, because at 250 employees, I knew everybody by name. It was still a family operation. And then it started on you've got to have a corporate structure. You've got to become more corporate, and we lost control of the business, and it was devastating for my parents, quite understandably. And I was able to parlay that from that disaster into a very successful print brokerage business. So basically, I was able to take my relationships, because I was very close to our clients. And the one great thing I could do was I was able to analyse those clients and work out who I wanted to work with and who I didn't. And there was a pattern. And the pattern was so many asshole clients who treated you appallingly, screwed you every moment that they could, drove you down and disputed everything that they possibly could, were in one bucket. And at the other end of the scale were the people that were an absolute pleasure to deal with. They paid very quickly and you made decent margins. And so what I was able to do was target those guys and set up a print brokerage company. So I was able to manage their requirements and then outsource the manufacturing. So I went from working in an organisation that was a nightmare to control with 320 people and struggling in the good years to make a couple of $1 million a year, to being a one-man band or a two-man. I had a couple of people come and join me and making $2 million a year with no responsibility of all those employees. So that was a massive eye-opener about the work smarter, not harder approach. But I didn't enjoy it. And don't get me wrong, we all love money. But I came to realise that money is not my main driver. It's a key driver. It's important. Feeding, clothing, family, holidays, all that sort of crap. Everybody likes to turn left when they step onto the aeroplane. But I was empty and I hated the industry. So I was always on the lookout for something else. And I got into property development and did some pretty interesting things in property development. But again, loved the money, but felt terribly unfulfilled. And then in a very freakish, fluky way, I was introduced to the precursor to skins business and thought, yeah, this is definitely something that I think will pique my interest. And I was fortunate that I had the capital to be able to put into skins to get it where we wanted to get to.
Yeah. There's so many parts of that I want to unpack. I mean, what you kind of touched on in terms of, you wish that you'd sort of kept the business about 250 because you still knew everyone by name, and there was still that sort of family business feeling, which you said that you sort of felt like you
which is more a psychological attachment. I was going to say ego. It's not quite ego, but it's more a psychological attachment, and it was an environment where you did feel like family. But stepping back now, a fucking disaster. I mean, printing is an absolute, you don't have to be blind, have to be Albert Einstein to know that industry has just crashed and burned dramatically. So in hindsight, I'm very glad that it happened. Devastated for my father and my mother, although they were okay. They weren't turfed out on the street or anything like that, but it was life-changing for them. But at 250 tops, probably between 200 and 250, I could have relationships with everybody. And then it was just a constant cacophony of advisors saying, oh, you're a large corporate now. You have to act like a large corporate and be like large corporates. And then I suddenly found myself walking the floor and seeing people who I didn't know. I didn't know their name. And that, for me, psychologically changed things dramatically, which no doubt contributed to the loss of control, because that's what it was. It was a loss of control within the business, whereas previously we were able to keep our eye on everything and jump in and manage stuff on an ad hoc basis. And that I tell you, it's probably a good observation that we weren't particularly smart, because if we were, we should have implemented all sorts of checks and balances and controls prior to. That would have prevented that from happening. So I'm in no way resiling from the fact that my father and I were completely responsible for what happened for that business. But it was out of our scope at that stage.
Yeah, no, I totally understand. I feel like, especially in the startup community, which is a large part of our sort of listener base, where there is, especially post-funding, this kind of urgency to grow and urgency to bring people on. It's a conversation that I have with a lot of founders of just that struggle and feeling like they're losing control, or it's just hard to kind of maintain those sort of things as they even go from 40 to 100 people within a couple of months. In hindsight, because, I guess some of the people that I've spoken to in relation to this interview, like, are people that you've had long-standing relationships with and people that have worked with you over an extended period of time. And so I'd just love to understand from your perspective in what would you do differently, or advice would you have for founders that are maybe going through that scaling stage of their company and kind of their team is massively growing at a rapid pace? What are ways of being able to handle that in a much more effective way?
Well, okay, I'm going to answer that question, but I'm going to answer that not in the context of my printing life, but I'm going to answer it in the context of skins. And probably the most apt advice I can give is be careful what you wish for. Because you do set out and think, yeah, I want to take over the world and I want to build something great and big and huge, and I want to transact globally, and I want to have offices in all these countries. Wanting to do it and thinking about it is one thing, but then going and executing it is different. And so the closest thing that I can think of there is I think we ended up with either 6 or 7 offices. We were in China, London, France, Germany, US, Australia, the Netherlands. We had an operation in the Netherlands, and I think I have one more. Switzerland, of course, Switzerland. And it became, once that was all implemented, it never occurred to me that I would never switch off, because I'd shifted to Switzerland. I'd moved to Switzerland to set up the global operations. And it ended up being where I was. In the mornings, it was all about Australia. During the day, it was all about Europe. And in the evenings, it was about the United States. And then I'd get to bed and I'd wake up and it was all about Australia. And it was this constant cycle. And again, because of the time zones, I didn't even have a weekend, because Saturday mornings were still sort of wrapping up the US. And then Sunday afternoons I was back into, or Sunday evening I'm back into Australia. So, and if you'd asked me before, if you'd mentioned to me that, this was a sort of life that I was going to have, I would have thought, oh, that's great. That's what I'd love to do. But it doesn't take long before you're sitting there thinking, oh, Christ, give me some downtime. It got to the point where I was traveling 11 months of the year, and I would look forward to flying from Sydney to Japan or Europe and the US, whatever, because then I'd have 8 to 12, 14 hours where I was out of contact. And some of those trips I would spend all the time just writing emails and catching up on emails. And I'd land and I'd log on and 120 emails would exit my outbox, right? And it's just this constant grind, which has to get you down. And I don't care who you are. Just don't get me wrong, some people can cope with it better than others. But that was the thing that got me. And so the combination of be careful what you wish for, and frankly, we didn't have our eye on the finances as best as we could. And we took the easy route on a couple of occasions, which ended up, and when it works really well, and that's great. But when it doesn't work, it's just tip the money in the toilet, set fire to it, whatever.
So can you elaborate what you mean by taking the easy route?
Okay, I'm going to talk in the context of Essendon Football Club. We were approached by Essendon in the wake of their drug scandal. Now, we had previously done a lot of work advocating for clean sport and calling out cheats, and in fact, I'd structured a sponsorship with Melbourne Storm, and I think it was 21 days later, the scandal blew up with their salary cap scandal. And we were the first brand to step away, and we were on the front page of the newspapers having stepped out of this relationship, simply because we were very clear in articulating what we stood for as a brand, and there was no way in the world that we could maintain a relationship. And by the way, it was an unbelievable commercial relationship. Right? Take all the philosophical aspects out of it. Commercially, it was a beautiful deal. But I had no choice but to step out, and I stepped out within a couple of hours of the news breaking. So that sort of gave you a bit of an idea of how we would approach the philosophical aspects of what we were doing. So we'd done all this advocacy, we'd done all these programs around anti-doping. We walked the walk as well as talked the talk. And then Essendon came knocking. And immediately my guys said, oh, no, we don't want to have anything to do with this. And I was in Switzerland and I was heading back here and they contacted me and said, look, these guys have requested a meeting with you. And I said, sure, we'll take it. Let's see what they have to say. And met with the CEO and he explained all the changes that they'd implemented within the club after that scandal had blown up. And all of the directors had gone bar one. All of the management had gone except for the whistleblower. And the thing that really, really impressed me was because their brand was suffering hugely in the football world. And he said that 2 people from the club, and it might have been the assistant marketing manager and one of the players. It could have been the COO and one of the players. And they went round and they knocked on the door of every single member of Essendon Football Club to talk to them about the changes that they were making and apologise for what had happened. And that's the hard yards. That's the hard work. It's so easy to say, let's put $250,000 into a marketing campaign and let's go and push out a marketing campaign and just flood the market and hope that all our members would see that. And they intentionally said, no, we're going to do this the hard way, the right way. That means a huge amount to those people. And I was so pleased to then enter into a commercial partnership with Essendon on that basis because it's so easy to do it easy and spend some money, especially when you've raised a big chunk of money and you've got, 8, 9 digits sitting in your bank account, whatever it is, and you can sit there and say, let's just cut a check. Well, no, that's not necessarily the right thing to do.
We're going to take a very quick break from this podcast to talk about one of our partners, Vanta. So if you're building a SaaS business and want to quickly unlock growth and build customer trust, one way to do this is by achieving compliance with SOC 2, ISO 27001, CPS 234, Essential 8, or other in-demand compliance frameworks. However, this process is often time-intensive and very costly. Vanta automates up to 90% of compliance, making you audit-ready quickly and saving you up to 85% of associated costs. And not only that, Vanta scales with your business. With a market-leading trust management platform to help you continuously monitor compliance, unify risk management, and streamline security reviews. You can join over 8,000 global companies like Atlassian, Dovetail, and Indebted that use Vanta to build trust and prove security in real time. As a listener of the show, you can get up to $1,000 US off Vanta when you head over to vanta.com/demo. All right, let's get back to the episode. Again, so many parts of your story that I want to unpack, but something else that you mentioned, which I personally resonate with, was, you can make money, but just feel really empty inside. So I had a similar experience when I was accidentally fell into running a marketing agency. And again, we were making good money a couple of years in and just woke up one day and I was like, what am I doing? I didn't even mean to start this business and it's doing okay, but it's not what I want to wake up doing every morning. So really had to take a big sort of look at myself and, I guess what was that experience like for you in, obviously being as part of the family business and sort of setting out to doing your own brokerage and then I guess exploring different things to sort of figure out what you did want to do?
So a lot of it's got to do with your own individual makeup. So when the printing company went bust, it was taken over by, that stage, Australia's largest printer. And I went with it to bed it in and to try and save as many jobs as I could from the company. And I was there for 3 months. And I thought, look, I'll give it a whirl. Now, this is 1997, and I think I was on 180 grand a year, and which was a lot of money in 1997, so almost 30 years ago. And I just had my second child, and we had my fourth child, because I had 2 step boys who were young. And so I had 4 kids. And after 3 months, I said to my wife, fuck this, I'm out. She said, no, you can't, and I said, no, I think I can go out on my own. I think I can do some brokerage. And she was dead against it. And, we argued, but I could not handle it. And so my makeup is more the nice way of saying entrepreneurial, I'd call it gambling. Right, risk taking, and I don't gamble.
Yeah.
Right, I don't gamble. You won't see me at the horses or casinos and that stuff. But that's my makeup. I also have been brought up with a sense of self-belief from my parents in that, you can do anything if you set your mind to it. So I did that against my wife's instructions, not desires, but instructions.
Mm.
And after my first 3 months, I sat down and said to her, I've made $250,000 in 3 months. There's something going on here. There's something quite remarkable about this, because I only did it as a stopgap. I thought I'll do this whilst I work out what I want to do. And that sort of built and had a life of its own. And like I said, it did really well. But I came to the conclusion, I've always believed I'm not a creative person. I can't paint. I can't draw. I can't play music. I'm not creative in the slightest. My favourite subject at school was mathematics. I can't, so I'm very, whether it's left brain, right brain, whatever it is, that's me. But through this journey, I've come to the conclusion that I am extremely creative, and my life in printing and in property development did not give me a creative outlet. I'm just not creative in that sense of the word, and art, drawing, sculpture, all that sort of stuff. I'm strategically creative, and I like to think that I'm creative when it comes to brand as well, but business strategy. And I get a big kick out of that. And there was no scope for me in a transactional business where I'm buying it for X and selling it for Y on a B2B basis, or when I'm just taking a block of dirt and then designing a subdivision or a retirement village and working with architects. And it's just that just didn't do me in the slightest. Whereas once I started down the skins round, and it was interesting because when I did the skins stuff, bear in mind, I had no experience in sport. I'd had no experience in textiles, and I had no experience in brand creation or consumer marketing. So I was an absolute babe. But I like to think I was naive enough. Some people would say I was arrogant enough to think I can do this, but it's going to be a journey, and I need to, you can't go into that thinking I know everything. This is what we're going to do. No. You go in and you shut your mouth and open your ears and turn on your brain. And then once you understand the fundamentals, then you start to think, okay, what can I do? And made lots of mistakes, like burnt lots of money going down blind alleys and then coming back and then doing other stuff. So really had some amazing learnings out of that. And probably the biggest one from that would have been the notion that, I've got something that can go global. I've got something that can have be attractive internationally. What I now know that I didn't know was you have to get it right here first. Right? You have to prove your business strategy, your marketing strategy, your comms strategy. Everything's got to be smooth and everything's got to be working. And then you go into other markets. Well, whilst we were sort of trying to work out what we were doing, we were also trying to engage in the United States. So I reckon I blew $1 million just going and engaging in the United States, thinking, well, that's where I want to be, before we had proven, our comms, our product strategy, our what our message was, what our positioning was. Before we'd done all that, what our brand stood, all that sort of stuff, we went too soon. And so that in this journey has set me up to go, okay, now I know what preliminary steps I need to do. I know how I need to prepare, as well as, as much as my appetite when we did the skins journey and I first brought on a private equity investor and set up a board of directors, I said to the guys then that, I think I'm the right guy to run this business. And at any point, if I'm not, then I'll be the first one to say I'm ready and happy to be replaced. Simply because, there are very few people who are capable of coming in at the entry point and taking it all the way through. And I can name you two. Rupert Murdoch, when you think, and don't get me wrong, he started with a newspaper, which is not a bad start. But in the context of where he is today, and I hate his politics and all that sort of stuff, but I can't but respect how he has gone through that journey and he has changed himself and evolved to be able to control that with some hiccups along the way is one. And Phil Knight at Nike is another, starting it from scratch and having this incredible thing. Not many people can do that. We've all got levels that you reach and you've reached your point, you can't go any further. And for me was in 2010 when I realised that, I'm not the right guy to run this business. I'm really good at the early stage, at the entrepreneurial stage and bringing people together and doing that sort of stuff. But when it comes to what I call the boring ops, right, and the discipline and coming in and sitting in front of that computer screen for 12 hours and pouring through spreadsheets, to me, it's soul destroying. But, you've got to have somebody running the business who can do that and who not just understands it, but has a desire to do that because they understand the power of it. And so when we started this business, I said, well, that's not going to be me. So immediately my co-founder, Dean, he's now the CEO of EO. So there's all those learnings that you take from that journey and try and implement.
I do want to talk about that, but maybe just to take a step back, because I think even your journey to how your involvement with Skins first came about is a fascinating story. So again, from what I understand, like you were saying, there was someone else that kind of came up with the initial concept of it, who again, at that time, I think they were selling or had testimonials from doctors and from...
So his name was Brad Duffy.
Yeah.
And he launched publicly in April 2002. Poor Brad, the time he launched exactly corresponded with his fabric mill shutting down to relocate. And he had a big pile of inventory on his floor, which sold out in 11 days. And so here he is with demand and no ability to supply for months and months and months. So come the end of the year, the business is pretty much busted. I got dragged in there and literally dragged in. I didn't want to go to this meeting. I was dragged in by a buddy of mine. And he wanted me to buy the US distribution rights because he wanted me to set him up in the US and fund a US operation for him to run. And so he dragged, and I did it just to shut this guy up, and I rocked along to this meeting. And I'm sorry there wasn't a camera in the room, because if you had a camera in the room, I sat there with my arms folded and very clearly, I don't want to be here. And Brad put in front of me a pile of testimonials. And I just started flicking through these testimonials. There's a doctor from the Australian cricket team, a physiotherapist from Leeds United, a strength and conditioning coach from Essendon Football Club, and a former captain of the Socceroos, and so on and so on and so on. And it was an inch thick. There are a lot of these testimonials, and these are from not just athletes who we know are paid to say nice things, but from medical practitioners and serious people. And after 2 hours, I came to the conclusion that this man, Brad Duffy, was either a massive con man who's very good at copying and pasting logos off the internet, creating testimonials, and I'll sign this one with my left hand and that one with my right hand and this one upside down. He's either done that or there's something interesting here. And the fundamental basis of a Skins was it incorporated a technology in sport that had never been done before, which is medical grade compression. So in medical grade compression, they use a gradient of pressure applied to different parts on the limb. And what that does is, because your blood goes down in your arteries and back in the veins, so it promotes venous return. And if you can push the blood back faster from the extremities of the limb back to the heart, then it flows faster through the arteries back to the extremities. And if you can do that, you're delivering more oxygen to your muscles. Now, I'm not a doctor, I have no medical background, but once Brad explained this to me, I thought, well, gee, that makes sense. And albeit on a different gradient profile. So bottom line is medical grade compression is used for people that are sick, infirm, recovering from operations, whatever. He said, I've taken this, I've changed the level of gradient, I've reduced it, but it's still a gradient, and applied it for not just healthy people, but uber healthy people in sport. And all the testimonials were all anecdotal, right? As in, I wear this and I feel so much better. So there was no science, no validation, no studies. But for me, it was, okay, this actually looks quite interesting. Anyway, 2-hour meeting, walked out, got in the car, Sat in the car. My buddy said to me, what do you reckon? You want to do it? You want to do it? Want to do it? And I said, I'm not interested in the US. And he went, oh. And I said, no, I want the whole fucking lot. And I sat in the car and I rang Brad. And I said to him, all right, Brad, let's cut the shit. You're evidently in trouble. How much do you need and when do you need it? And he said, yes, we are in trouble. Because he hadn't told me this, but I could tell through body language and the conversation. And he told me what he needed, and he needed it in 6 days. I said, what happens if you don't get it? And he said, well, company goes into administration, then liquidation, and I'll probably go over to Europe and I'll do it over there. And I said, all right, I'll cut you a check in 4. I said, is it enough? He said, yeah. I said, all right, I'll cut you a check in 4. We'll meet at the lawyers. We'll do up an agreement, and I'll put the money into the business to pay the outstanding debt and to give us a bit of working capital. And that was the start. And for that, I said to him, because he had a pool of angels, investors that he'd over years had several times put more money in through the journey, and put more money in multiple times to the point where the last time they said, don't darken our doorstep again, which was he couldn't go back to them, which is why the opportunity was there. So I said to him, all right, this is what I want to do. I said, you don't know me from Adam. And this is literally whilst I'm sitting in the car in his car park. I said, you don't know me from Adam. We've had a 2-hour meeting. I'm not sufficiently arrogant to say that I want to control this business and I should control this business. So what I want in return for the funding is I want 49%. And of all your angel investors, have you got one there that you're particularly close to? He said, yes. I said, all right, this is what I want you to do. I said, you take 41% and you give 10% to your mate. So between you, you've got 51 and I've got 49. Because I think that, A, I'm going to have a lot of fun with this, and I think I can contribute. I think I can help a lot beyond the money. And that's how it started. And then it just, it was a slog, and it was losing a lot of money for a long time. And I won't go into how much, but if my initial investment was X, I topped out at 9X. Right. And it was terrifying. I remember being at the point where I was in for 2.5 million. And you can do the maths yourself. That was about 50% of what 9X was. Right. And I remember looking in the mirror one morning at 2.5 million, continuing to make losses, going, what the fuck am I doing? What's going on here? But inherently, I believed in it because we had something that was very special that no one else was doing. And it was not only no one else was doing, it was difficult to do. And the fact that it's difficult to do makes it, in some ways, that much better, because the harder it is to crack.
I feel like there's, so many situations where founders have built this really, really incredible product that has got some early traction, some early sort of customer testimonials. What was it that gave you that conviction that this was the right business to put a lot of your personal money behind and get behind? And secondly, what was it that you think the business was missing at that time to kind of get it to the point where it did become a successful business and generating revenue?
So there's a number of things here. The thing that kept driving me was its uniqueness. And for me, the fundamental understanding that athletes, elite professional athletes, if you can give them some sort of performance benefit, that's gold. And we had that. And so it's not a question of if, but it's a question of when. How long is it going to take? How much is it going to take? But at some point, we're going to cross that Rubicon, and it's going to wash its own face, and then it's going to take off. And that's exactly what happened. And you've just got to hang on for the ride. So I was in for, at that point I told you, I was in for 2.5. Now I say this to people. If I didn't have the personal capacity to go in for more when it needed it, you could shut the doors and walk away because no one was going to come along. Like when I was looking in the mirror, I remember thinking to myself, if somebody came along and said, Jaimie, I'll give you 2.5 to walk away, I'd take their arm off. Because we're scared of the unknown. Even though I believed in what we were doing, it's still this, what you look at is this, this black hole that's just eating cash. But again, I knew we had something, and I knew it was special. It's not like I'm going to open another coffee shop, and everybody else is doing it. I'm going to smile more, or or I'm going to do it 5 cents a cup cheaper than the guy down the road. It's not like that. It's I've got something special. So I think that was the first piece. The second piece of what were we missing? Look, I honestly don't know. Probably apart from the fact that we tried to run before we could walk, when I talked about going to the US and blowing that money and that sort of stuff. Apart from that, I don't think there's any magic bullet here. I think you've got to go through the journey, and the piece of the journey that we had to resolve was the validation and the testing, and that takes time. So I recall late one night, Brad and I sitting up in the office on the phone to a guy called Doc Stone. Now, this had been arranged by a guy who we work closely with called Graham Arnold, and Arnie was, until only a few weeks ago, he was the manager of the Socceroos. At that stage, he was the assistant manager and former captain. And Arnie was somebody I inherited in the business. Awesome guy, wonderful man, brilliant man, miserable fucker, but really lovely guy. And Arnie had lined up a call with us with Doc Stone, who was the doctor at Manchester United. And the great thing when you're dealing with strength and conditioning coaches, physios and doctors, they understand medical compression. They understand scientifically what it is. And so it's not a huge leap to take that across to elite athletes, albeit at a different gradient. So we get on the call with Doc. We explained it to him. He said, yeah, get it, love it, sounds great. But he said, I've got, and this is sort of 2003. He said, I've got £1 billion worth of cattle running around on Old Trafford at the moment, and if you think I'm going to put something on those players, including Cristiano Ronaldo, he said, if you think I'm going to put your product on those players without any form of validation, you've got rocks in your head. So we hung up, and I looked at Brad and he looked at me, and I said, well, what are we going to do? And he said, I've got some ideas about how we can go about trying to validate this. And we went and did a pilot study, and I didn't really care so much about the degree of the results. I just wanted to see a pilot study that showed that, yes, you can measure something. And for us, it was creatine kinase. We're able to measure creatine kinase levels, and you could see that the gradient compression was affecting the physiology of the wearer, and it was changing in the output of creatine kinase. And so then we went and commissioned, we encouraged academics to go off and do studies. Didn't pay them, didn't pay for them. We supplied product. And at the end, I think we had 26 studies that validated all our claims that were published in peer-reviewed journals like the Australian Medical Journal and the British Journal of Sports Science and so on, that really were able to do that. So when we sat down with docs of federations and clubs, we were able to put down this massive, great, thick document and say, here's our proof. And because for us, and we lucked into this, this was not, we were selling to the elite because we needed revenue. But when you sit back now and look at it, it was absolutely brilliant strategy, because if you can sell product to the elite in a sports brand, that's unheard of. At very best, brands are giving them product for free and hoping not just that they'll wear it, but they'll be seen to be wearing it. But 99% of the time, it's the brands are throwing cash and throwing money at them to endorse, in inverted commas, their product and their brand. We went about it the other way. We sold them product, and we were very generous, and we gave them a 10% discount off retail price for bulk purchases. And that just turned into step one of a brilliant strategy, because the second step was then going out and doing the advertising and the marketing and telling the story. And for us, it was all encapsulated with, we don't pay sports stars to wear our products, they pay us, which then opened the door for us to absolutely take the piss and rip the shit out of brands like Nike for bluntly paying all these guys and then riding on the coattails of a sponsorship endorsement deal that we thought, well, if your brands are so good and if your products are so good, why are you paying them?
So what was that, almost a accidental strategy that you sort of stumbled on?
Totally. So I know when we set up the new business EO, I was able to then articulate it in 3 clear steps. Step 1, have a product and or a technology that's unique, that's going to deliver a benefit to the elite. Step 2, get the elite engaged, wearing, using, whatever. Step 3, tell the story. Because if the cookie cutter vanilla strategy of Nike's going to pay Lionel Messi, or Adi pays Lionel Messi X squillions a year, and then they're going to use cutouts and photos and you know what it's like. I mean, you have a look at Ronaldo. Ronaldo, they do a photo shoot with a Ronaldo holding a can of X, and then they'll take X out and they'll put a bloody telephone in his hand. You know, I'm Cristiano Ronaldo and I endorse this product, you know, or I endorse ... you know, insert product name here. That evidently works, which I think is a little bit bizarre. And if that works, you can imagine how it works when you have a genuine, authentic engagement with the elite, when the elite are saying, I have to have this, because their performance is their livelihood. And if you've got something that's going to help them improve their performance, they don't care. I mean, I don't want to harp on Essendon. I'll bring up Essendon again. We were selling to, I think we had at that stage 15 of 16 AFL clubs. And we struggled with Essendon. And Essendon were the one that really refused to buy our product and engage with us because they had a partnership with Puma. And their head of commercial refused to not just jeopardise, but to do the wrong thing by Puma, which I understand. But on the other side of the table, you had the coach, the players, the strength and conditioning guy, the doc, all saying, this is a performance-based sport. We want skins, we need skins. Couldn't be broken. Eventually, and they have, you know, they've got in AFL clubs, they've got these things called coteries, these groups of mega fans, super fans, who put huge amounts of money into the club. Well, eventually, I got a call from the strength and conditioning guy at Essendon, and he said, Jaimie, I'm going to introduce you to a guy in a coterie here, because I was speaking to him the other night, and he said, is there anything you need? And I said, yeah, well, we'd love to do this, but we can't. The commercial guys won't let us buy this. And he said, well, there's nothing stopping me buying it. And before you knew it, this guy had bought 150 pairs of skins and supplied them to all the players in the club. So this is how important these products can be for players. And if you can have that and have an authentic, genuine relationship like that, an engagement like that, man, that is such a massive thing to then go to your weekend warriors and your people like me who are influenced by these elite guys. And if you're smart enough to be able to communicate it and tell that story, well, I saw it last time, it absolutely blew up.
Yeah. I think one thing that we really sort of initially connected on was around the importance of brand and brand storytelling. I spoke to a good friend of yours, Ant, who, you know, mentioned that you don't necessarily come from a marketing background specifically, but you just have this incredible gut feel for brand and telling that story to consumers. What does that sort of look like for you? What did that look like in skins, and how do you sort of think about that from an EO perspective in like really shaping something that's a little bit different and telling that story in a way that really resonates with your target audience?
So there's two things here. There's what I'd describe as the objective-subjective split. And judgment is, whether it's judgment or taste, are interesting things, right? You can let's invent a character. Let's give him a orange face and stupid hair and no class, no taste, no judgment at all, on a massive golden escalator, who thinks that it's classy to have gold-plated toilets and all that sort of rubbish, right? That is not, in my opinion, the type of perspective that you want to bring to this conversation, unless you're aiming at people that are impressed by gold-plated lavatories and poor taste, and there's a bunch of them out there. When you're doing what we're doing, because whether it was skins, because we sat down and we at one point we wanted to describe our perfect customer. And if I remember correctly, it was a 32-year-old professional, 6-figure salary, triathlete, $15,000 bike hanging on the wall, cappuccino machine. And this was 15 years ago, before most homes had cappuccino machines, right? I mean, so we're able to paint the picture of this person: intelligent, researched, intellectual, driven by performance. That takes a certain connection mentally with that person to position your brand. You don't connect with that person through sale, 90% off, discount. That's sort of what I call the awful transactional advertising. So that takes judgment. And I got to add, I be honest here, when I talk about that judgment, I've only learnt that judgment through the journey. Like that first campaign, we just introduced to a new agency out of Melbourne, actually, that had opened up an office in Sydney. And so they were looking for a brand to build a reputation on. And we had this meeting, and they came and pitched a TVC. And I was with, at that stage, my marketing guy who'd come from FMCG. And I had no idea what I was doing. And so we sat down, and they had pitched us this TV concept of, we don't pay for sports stars to wear our products, they pay us. And I had a fixed image in my mind, because when I bought the business, I inherited Steve Orr of the face of the product. And I'd sort of figured that this ad was going to have Steve Orr walking across a cricket field, looking into the camera. Hi, I'm Steve Orr. I want to tell you about this wonderful product called Skins. It enhances circulation. It does this, blah, 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 all about what the product does. They pitched this completely different concept. And we argued for 2 hours, like really not fought, but strongly argued. It was vigorous. And the thing that I loved most, nearing the end of the meeting, the creative director said to me, Jaimie, with all due respect, you've got no fucking idea what you're talking about. And I looked at him and I responded, you're absolutely right. But I am the clown that's got to cut the check for $1 million to pay for the market, for the campaign, and for the billboards and the TV time and the blah, 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 blah. And I said, yeah, you are right. And I thought, God, I like this guy. You never hear, particularly in that advertising world, you'd never hear clients spoken to like that. I love it, right? I hate people. I really hate people telling me, and sometimes I get told by others that, that guy that said, yes, Jaimie, I agree, that's great. Well, after the meeting, he said to me, Fuller doesn't have a clue what he's talking about. That was shit. Right? So I wipe him like a dirty ass. That's not what I want. And I tell everybody, you give it to me raw. I can take it. I'm a big girl. Don't hold back. Anyway, at the end of the 2 hours, I said, all right, you guys have argued vociferously here. I'm going to do it. Right? I don't know that it's going to work. I don't know that it's not going to work, but I'll roll the dice. And that was the thing that sort of led us into that explosion, if you like, with the brand. Because then, because people, they love brands. And I reckon 97% of people that bought Skins didn't need, because at the end of the day, we're talking about small micro improvements through compression. I can understand it from a professional footballer, an elite footballer who can get through their recovery faster or have a slight minimisation of micro muscle tears because they're wearing this stuff. But kids and what have you, they're not buying it for that. They're not paying $150 for a pair of tights when they can go and get a pair of $60 Nike ones because of this slight micro tear. No. There's a couple of things. One, they love the image and the brand that it portrays, and particularly they love the statement that it makes about them. I'm serious about sport, and I love the fact that these things with a yellow stripe running down the front, people look at them and go, I know what. Now, some of that's conscious, some of it's subconscious. So to go through that journey and then to be able to understand how those pieces come together. And one of the other critical things that I tell everybody in marketing, if you've got the pyramid of influence, and if you've got the elite guys sitting at the top, and then you've got the weekend warriors or serious amateurs here, and then you've got the mass below, you never, ever, ever communicate to the masses. You communicate to the people at the top. The people at the top don't aspire to be like the people at the bottom, right? You communicate. And so, again, if you're dealing with a segment of the market who is articulate, intelligent, and frankly, like niche. There's another thing we could spend an hour talking about, niche brands that do incredible things and then they become mainstream and it shits itself, right? And so the part of the challenge and part of the opportunity is how do you remain niche but scale?
Yeah.
And then you get that realm of challenger brands. There's nothing better than being a challenger brand. I mean, obviously we all want to have the budgets that the big boys have, but you can be nimble and you can do some amazing stuff as a challenger brand. And this is where Nike have been so good, because even though they are the dominant, they're the big player, they still come at this from a challenger mentality. And again, if you're going through that process and if you are a challenger, the other golden rule is don't be scared to piss people off, right? Too much, it's about, let's, we don't want to offend anybody. Oh, fuck that. Seriously, you can, my mantra has always been ambivalence is the enemy. And again, if I go back 20 years with the Skins journey, because it wasn't about online advertising, it was just a little bit starting, but we had traditional things like sports magazines and we would run ads, physical ads in these physical magazines. And you could watch somebody sitting there with a magazine flicking through, editorial, ad, and just flick through, boring. When you got to a Skins ad, you go, ooh, what's that? Right? And there's no doubt there might be a really in-your-face headline that would piss some people off. But everybody noticed it. And you're much better off in that position than you are saying, I'm going to be risk averse here and I'm going to make sure that I don't upset anybody or I don't piss people off.
I have a great quote from Ant. He said, with all the varied and many clients he's worked with, he hasn't met with anyone with a bigger pair of stainless steel balls. When he's firmly passionate about a point of view or product, he just commits and he's not afraid to fight for that point of view and take it to the edge. I imagine that, a lot of companies start off with that mentality, and it's easy to do that when you become, as you said, like a challenger brand and you're sort of fighting up. When you're generating hundreds of millions of dollars, there's a lot more attention on you. That's much more difficult to maintain.
Particularly if you then enter the corporate world where you then bring in a board of independent directors who then become very risk averse. And that's why it's critical that you've got some sort of ongoing cohesion. Like there's a red line that runs through it. And you've got to have that DNA champion. And it tends to be the founder, right? It tends to be the founder that has this and that continues that, because you lose that. You lose the DNA, you lose the spark that makes your brand beautiful. You lose the thing that people love you for, right? They don't necessarily love the individual. Because the other thing I learned was that brands are like a living organism. It's important to shape them. It's important to articulate what you stand for and to define what you stand for and then articulate it. So for us at Skins, for me, the big golden moment was we worked with, and this was the one thing that my private equity partner brought to the table, right? I'm very scathing about the concept of private equity, but he introduced me to a guy in London who worked in a business called Eat Big Fish. And this had started with a guy who wrote a book called Eating the Big Fish, all about challenger brand and challenger brand behavior. Little fish eats the big fish. And they came over, a group of them came over, and we had this huge process which basically strips your brand back. And let's take it back to the absolute center of it. And let's work out what you stand for, because if you need to define it and then you need to articulate it clearly. And then that becomes not just a brand mantra, but a cultural mantra within the company and the corporate DNA. And for us at Skins, it was fueling the true spirit of competition. And so that helped shape things like who do we partner with as sponsors, right? And how do we behave? And what do we do with our packaging and our point of sale? Is it in context? Is it in line with our corporate value of fueling the true spirit of competition? So fast forward to 4 years ago, 2020, and I'm in London, where my brand agency is in London, and I got stuck there for 6 months. And so we went through this process about EO, about starting to create the brand and set the rules, which was just awesome, starting from a blank piece of paper, and you talk through all that stuff. And I kid you not, we worked on it for 5 months, and we were able to articulate our belief as accelerating human progress through sport. So we're about accelerating human progress through sport, and we didn't have a brand name, right? So we had the line, we'd done the work, we had a tone of voice, we had a personality framed, right? We did all that stuff, and now we've got what we stand for, but we don't have a brand name. But 2 weeks later, the creative director rang me and said, Jaimie, I've got something interesting for you. The word for progress in Latin is EO, and there's no other brand out there called EO. And then it all hangs together and you go, okay, now I have my brand name. And you know what? It's 2 letters. It's perfect. The only thing that was imperfect was EO.com. They wanted $6 million for it. Right. So that then how you then frame it and start it, and then you build on it. But having that kernel that sits in the middle that you can clearly understand, like that personality, that tone of voice, and making sure it's consistent. And as you grow and as you change, you keep coming back to, this is who we are, this is what we stand for, and it doesn't matter what private equity / McKinsey consultant / CFO / accountant / arsehole / whatever says, oh no, we need to do it differently. You need the champion there saying, no, we need to be honest to ourselves, because this is what frames us and what makes us.
Sender is the OG startup accounting firm in Australia, catering to all stages of your business life. If you're busy running a business, you don't always have the time to do your own books and forecasts, and instead you can fully outsource your finance function so that you have the time and resources back to do what you do best, which is growing your business. They have a dedicated focus on founders, funds, and startups, and have an experienced team that can help you with everything from managing your tax to balancing your books to even helping with your exit strategy. I trust and use them with all of my businesses and can't recommend them highly enough. To find out more or to speak to Gareth and the team, head over to sender.com. All right, let's get back to this episode. Just on that, because earlier you mentioned, and it's an experience that I imagine a lot of founders go through, which is pretty much working 7 days a week for 14 hours. You're drained. As you said, there's overtime as you've got more investors and more people on the board. There's a lot of stakeholders and a lot of cooks in the kitchen with those sort of things. How do you personally maintain that spark for yourself as a founder? And then by extension, how do you sort of set up things internally within a company that help keep that sort of, like you said, that core DNA alive and running, even as the company's,
as small as we are. Yeah. So first of all, this is my life. I mean, this is the thing that gets me out of bed in the morning. This is the thing that excites me. I've got my balls on the line, totally, right? I said before that I could, after Skins, I could feed and clothe my family. Well, I tell you what, after this I can't, right? Unless things go well. I mean, I've chucked everything in the kitchen sink at this, but that's not what's driving me. What drives me now is because I thought what we were doing at Skins was really innovative. That was a load of horse shit. I mean, it was innovative in the context of 2003, 2004. But even today, 20 years down the track, the Chinese owners of Skins are still relying on the technology that we introduced in 2003. That's not innovation. What we're doing now is true innovation. But we're not limited to compression and we're not limited to textiles. Because that's the way that I set the business up to you frame it and what we're about and where we play and what we play in and what we do. And for us, it's about sport agnostic, tech agnostic, product agnostic. So suddenly it opens massive doors. But that's what we don't do. What we do is we create products that either enhance performance, accelerate recovery, minimize or prevent injury, and assist rehabilitation. So that gives you a great sense of framing and reference as to the types of things you can do. And we can play in wearables, we can do nutrition, we can do apparel. I don't care as long as it delivers a tangible benefit to the elite athlete. Now there's some other criteria in terms of its commercialization, right? It's pointless creating products that you can only sell to 20 people. So we create products that we can sell to the weekend warrior, people who want to be like our heroes. But it enables us to look at areas where haven't been explored, where people haven't had the intellectual property or the intellect to bring together certain components to create a solution, a device, whatever, with existing technologies. We're not going out and inventing Wi-Fi. We're taking technologies from adjacent categories and applying them where that hasn't been applied before. So that stuff really floats my boat, and that gives me the desire to make it happen. As far as then making sure that you stay the course, I'm really fortunate that I've got two co-founders. One of them was principal scientist or chief scientist at the New South Wales Institute of Sport. He was their employee number one back to 1996 when NSWIS was set up with the upcoming Sydney Olympic Games. And he was 24 years in NSWIS and the last 14 years as chief scientist. So he's got this unbelievable brain that can not only understands what moves the needle for an elite or an Olympic athlete, but he also sits on the research review committee for the Australian Institute of Sport. So he's seeing it's his passion is looking at emerging research, what's coming through. And when you've got an idea of what moves the needle and what emerging research is coming through, and you're on top of technology revolution and pace improvement, you can then start to visualize how you can create products and apply them in elite sport. Now, my job is then, when I talk to him, is then can I take that and can I make that applicable for everybody else, for all of us weekend warriors? And when you can put all that together and you can protect it through patents and it's proprietary and you've got something unique, you're not going out saying I'm going to create another GPS tracking device because, I can do it $100 cheaper than Catapult, or I can do it with I've got a better marketing message. It's not what we're about. But when you can do that, that's great. Now, that's one of my co-founders. The other co-founder is a guy called Dean Hawkins. And Dean, in the early 90s, was working at UBS in Zurich, Aussie guy. And he was approached by this man called Robert Louis Dreyfus, who, by the way, was first cousin to Julia Louis Dreyfus of Seinfeld and Veep fame. And Robert came from one of the wealthiest families in Europe, like multi-billionaire families. And Robert had acquired Adidas in the late 80s for the princely sum of 10,000 euros. He bought the whole business, the brand, out of bankruptcy. And he was able to turn it around, and then he went to Dean, and he got Dean to run the IPO of Adidas on the German Stock Exchange, where Robert turned his 10,000 euro investment into a $3 billion market capitalization business. And Dean did such a great job that Robert said to him, I want you to come and be my CFO. And Dean said, no, you can jam that in your ass. I'm not interested in being a glorified accountant. So he said, all right, what if I've also made you global head of strategy as well? So Dean went, yes. So he went over and he was CFO and global head of strategy. So through the Skins journey, through the early part of the journey, Dean was my chairman and I was CEO. And now with this part of the journey, we've flipped it. So Dean's the CEO and I'm the chairman. And so having his yin to my yang or vice versa works incredibly well. So I'm there championing all the brave bits and the courageous bits, and Dean champions the responsible side. But there's a huge degree of trust between us. So, and we clash, and we have. And I'll never forget. Dean said to me once years ago. He said that Dreyfus had said to him once when we were talking about tension and conflict, and he said to Dean, he said tension's good. He said conflict is good. He said creative can be really strong out of conflict, not abuse, not screaming, yelling, fighting, stamping, kicking, biting, but disagreement, and then working through it. It's really good for the organisation and it's good for relationships as long as you do it properly. And we do that, but we both have an enormous degree of trust in one another.
Yeah, I did speak to Dean in the lead up to this interview. One story that I think you also referenced was, I think there was a period when you fired Dean from the board.
Well, technically I did. No, in 2012 I did a transaction I had to get rid of my private equity partner, otherwise they were going to usurp the whole business. And the only way I could do that was to borrow a stonking great amount of money out of Japan, which I did. And so that got rid of the private equity guys. And now I was back to 100% ownership with a massive amount of debt. So it came with cost-cutting requirements. And the first thing, the easiest thing was, frankly, to fire the whole board. So I terminated the board, and Dean was part of that because I just couldn't afford it anymore. So, I mean, it was a difficult decision, but in some ways it was an easy decision because I just needed to save the money.
Yeah. And I know that you also kind of referenced this at the start, but you mentioned that you didn't really enjoy the CEO role at a particular point as well, or there was a period where you had to step away.
Well, so 2010, we all agreed that I had to be replaced. Went through that process, appointed a guy who interviewed beautifully, fabulous, really impressive, but fuck, he was a disaster, total disaster. So he then moved on. Another guy came in. He actually did a good job. So I sort of was in a supporting role then. Anyway, he then moved on to other pastures, did the transaction, and I sat in the role. And then from 2000 and probably 2014 onwards, it was very difficult, you know, and I had, 4 years of pretty much horrible stuff whilst rushing around trying to save this business, because you could see the interest bills were just draining the business of cash, and that means you end up doing stupid things. A couple of examples. Amazon. 2 ways you can transact with Amazon. You can have representation on their website with your own shop, Amazon Marketplace, and you control the pricing, you control the message, everything like that, which is terrific. Or alternatively, you can sell your product to Amazon and then they control the selling of those products. And selling your product to Amazon is a massive sugar hit because you get a big check and you get it quickly. Now, when you're staring down the face of millions of dollars of interest payments due and you don't have the cash, then it's very tempting to do those deals. Likewise, in Australia, we shut down our number one subsidiary, our biggest subsidiary in the world. We shut down and appointed a distributor so that we could cash out our debtors and our inventory to be able to pay interest. So short term, understand why we did it. Long term, disastrous for the business. Wrong move. But when you're doing that, and so my last 4 years was doing shit like that, which was, and you know that it's wrong. You know that you shouldn't be doing it. But you've got a gun to your head and you've got to make these payments. And so going through that, and it becomes soul destroying, and and having to work through that. And in the meantime, you're sitting here thinking, this brand, this business is my baby, and I'm doing the wrong thing by it.
Which, to what I understand, in 2019, company filed for bankruptcy.
January 2019, appointed a trustee in bankruptcy to the global operation in Switzerland.
Yeah.
And then that left me with about 7 months of absolute nightmare of winding up all of the subsidiaries all around the world. At one point, I had 13 lawyers working for me personally. I had lawyers representing me individually, representing me as a director, I had barristers. I mean, it was just in different jurisdictions, it was just a massive shit fight.
What was that period like for you?
So I found myself when probably, because I moved out of Switzerland actually a year earlier, I'd stepped back from the CEO role and put in a management committee. My senior guys wanted to run the business, and you lose confidence in yourself. So I'd stepped back and said, yeah, okay. And I'd sort of stepped into more of it was technically a non-exec role, I guess. And so the guys were running the business, and for me, it was a roll of the dice. It didn't work, but I don't blame them. Definitely don't blame them. So I was then based in the UK, and I was actually living at that, and I was still traveling a hell of a lot. So I didn't have a permanent base. So I went and set myself up in a farm cottage in Rutland, in Rutland, just north of Leicestershire in the UK. And, when it happened in that December and January, my wife and kids were back in Australia, and I was there living on my own. And I pushed the button. I think it was the 19th of January. It was, pretty hard moment, but it wasn't like it came as a shock. We've been building. And if you'd asked me before, if you'd said, what's it going to be like? I would have said, I reckon I'm probably going to have 3, more likely 6 months of deep depression. But I'll work my way out of it. It's going to be tough. And as it was 11 days. And I had 11 days and it was more about the opacity. It was this fog had descended and I didn't know what was happening and I couldn't see what was happening. And there's all this uncertainty and fear. And it was very, very difficult to take for 11 days. Then on the 12th day, I had a very, very strong discussion with myself. And suddenly everything lifted. And suddenly it was this switch that went from deep depression to the future actually might be really interesting. And it's all totally within yourself, right? Now, I was fortunate that I could still clothe and feed and put a roof over the house of my family. It wasn't like there are some people that go through this shit that they lose everything. I was not in that boat. I lost, reputationally it was obviously, hard to take, particularly if you've got an ego, and I've got an ego. We've all got egos, but I'd taken positions on the global stage around all sorts of things, and there was certainly a movement of people that absolutely hated my guts in sports governance and administration. I got spat at by one of them at one point for the work that I was doing in anti-doping. A guy from the International Athletics Federation literally spat at me and said to me, how dare you try and interfere with what we do in the governance of athletics when these guys had been covering up doping scandal. Literally it was that. So I knew there was going to be a significant element of schadenfreude about, Fuller's got his comeuppance, that arsehole's been taught a lesson. So you go through all those thoughts and the, that sort of impact. And, at this stage, where are we? 5 years ago. So I was 54, 55. Fuck, I'm an old man, what am I going to do? And I am unemployable. I've said for years and years and years, I'm unemployable. I need to work for myself. The idea of me going off and, get out, in my old language, get out the newspaper and the position's vacant ad, and looking at it, applying for a job, that's not for me. I went back to 1997 when that happened for 3 months. That's not for me. I realised then I can't work for anybody. I need to work for myself. But on that 12th day, it's literally you go from worrying about and fear of, the unknown and all that sort of shit to the excitement. It takes you back to your youth. I remember as a young man thinking, wow, can you imagine what this journey might be like? Can you imagine the things that we might be able to do? But it takes a certain level of naivety or confidence or arrogance or whatever you like to be able to do that mentally. And it worked.
What was the conversation that you had with yourself, if you don't mind me asking?
No, it was literally, I said to myself, if I was sitting opposite somebody in my shoes, what would I say? And I said, I would say you've gone through 4 years of hell. You've been handcuffed to this rotting corpse. And it's a terrible way to describe skins, but that's what it felt like. It was this dying thing, gradually this slow train wreck and slow-mo coming. And you can see where you're going to go to. And you're in denial, but it's happening. And I was handcuffed to it because I had to see it through. And there was this sense of obligation. And it also came with also throwing more money in it. I hocked my wife's house to put money into, sold my wife's house to put money into skins in its bad days. So I was fully committed, stupidly committed, did stupid things like that. And so to then say to somebody in that position, you've been handcuffed to this dying and rotting corpse for so long. There's so much you can do. There are so many things you can do. And look at all the great stuff you've done. Look at all the things you've learned. Look at what you know today that you didn't know then. And can you imagine applying that now in a different way? And if you can remove yourself from the fear of the unknown, and don't be scared of the unknown, but embrace it, Because so many times, you set out on a journey, and as much as people say, oh, the way to do it is you've got to be able to define destination, understand where you are, and define each of the steps, and that's your plan, and then you go and do it. Fucking bollocks. I mean, sometimes okay, but so many times I've got a rough idea of destination, but I know what step one is, right? And I'm taking step one. Now, I try as much as I can to describe and define in the parts of the process when you're building particularly technology and, user experience and all that sort of stuff. You do. Absolutely, you've got to define it. But other times with other things, you've got to set out. And our swim device that we have is one of those that it's got so much functionality now that we had no idea that we could find, right? But we knew that this was going to create a whole pile of data, and being able to explore that data and then interpret it and work out what that data can mean and then how we can present it to the user. You don't go through that. Life's not like this where you're able to sit it down and structure it and plan it out. And frankly, I screwed my German business, the most beautiful German business with Skins. It was exquisite. We were in the 50 greatest retailers, and these are in the days when retail representation was imperative as opposed to just selling online. We were in the 50 best retailers, and my fucking private equity guy and the corporate approach basically said to me, no, Jaimie, you've got to do this differently. You're in 50 today. We want to see a plan that shows us in 800 retail doors in 4 years' time, and we want to see the steps that you go through to get to that. And so if, after year one you need to be in 250, we want to know who those 250 doors are. And we then had said, okay, well, to do that, we have to go in Sport 2000. So we have to go and sell into Sport 2000. We weren't ready to go to sell into Sport 2000. The brand, I describe it as a cake. If a cake goes in the oven for 45 minutes at 180 degrees, you don't get to turn the oven up to 400 and say, I want to cook it in 20 minutes. You don't get to do that. It takes whatever it takes. And it's the same with this stage of brand creation, brand building, representation, education, awareness. You've got to get it to the point before you're ready to go the next step. And so we then went to that step too soon. We then lost, because those 50 doors who were the creme de la creme of German retail excellence in sport saw us going in and going down that pyramid before we were ready. And then they backed off their commitment to us. And that shafted our German business. Because businesses, and too many times I hear consultants and people that haven't done it, or they might do it in a transactional, I've got a power transformer business. We build these transformers and we create power and energy and then we ship it. And you know what? It's very transactional, because if I bring in $10 million, I can increase it by X, which then increases my output by Y times my price per kilowatt or what have you. And it's very, very standard, right? When you're engaging in a consumer brand, when you're creating and building a consumer brand, it's a very different world. There is no magic formula. You've got to catch lightning in a bottle. Now, it doesn't happen unless you try. You've got to make steps. You've got to do things. You've got to try and fan the flames. You've got to try and feed it and get it going. But there's no guarantee it's going to work. Mm-hmm. And you can't sit there and say, well, my timeline says it has to do this by 12 months or 8 months or whatever. It doesn't work that way. You set out on that journey and you get going. And albeit you understand where you want to get to, and sometimes sometimes it'll take you 4 years to do it. Sometimes it'll take you a year and a half because suddenly it explodes. Other times it takes 6 years.
Just going back to the point around, it's almost like keeping perspective of where you're at with the journey. So what you just kind of said about those sort of 11 days, and then realizing that actually it's maybe liberating and allows you to do different, like EO may not be a business that you got to.
And it's a much, much, much better, much bigger business than Skins would ever dream of. EO will have the capacity to do that.
Yeah. And that may not have happened if the whole, downward journey with Skins hadn't happened, because you would still be involved in that. It's just hard to kind of separate yourself out in those particular moments. And so, yeah, it's tough when you're in the middle of it to kind of, like you said, lift yourself away from the fog when it just feels like it's all kind of descending on you. I don't know if I mentioned this, but I did a 10-day Vipassana retreat. I don't know if you've come across that before, but it's silent meditation, it's the whole thing is about building equanimity, which is like looking at things the way that they are, not as you wish them to be, either in the past or in the future. And I feel like in my own looking back in a lot of those sort of times, you just get into this mode where you just are fearful or just kind of project all of these things where, like you said, you were losing confidence and all those sort of things. And so you just imagine that it will always be like that, or you just can't see an end to that. And like you said,
it's about hope.
It's about hope.
You lose hope.
Yep. Yeah. And it's so hard to be able to pull that. And so, as you said, it's about sort of having those conversations in perspective, and sometimes amazing to have those conversations with you. It's amazing to have those types of conversations with other people around you that can hopefully give you some of that perspective and kind of be that sounding board. But so valuable to do that. Just finally, I guess, you mentioned going into skins, you were really sort of naive in terms of what it took. A lot of people, having gone through the journey that you went through, the ups and downs of skins, would go, oh my God, that was insane. I don't know if I can do that again. And you've kind of built up that, you have a much stronger understanding of like the really shit parts of building a company of that size.
And knowing my own limitations.
And knowing your own limitations, which I think is one of the best parts of running a business. It's a very humbling experience and kind of teaches you a lot about yourself as well. But I guess what was that? Did that make starting EO more difficult? Was that, what was that sort of process like for you to kind of jump in again at this stage in your life?
Oh God, no, it didn't make it difficult at all. It made it a lot easier because you've got that knowledge, that awareness, and you can then have a much better idea instead of like skins was genuinely, I'm going to step on this journey and I have no idea where it's going to go. This is very different. I am able to do a much better job of describing destination. There's still areas within it. Everything should have some sort of plan to it, right? And so you need to have a much better idea. And I'm talking about not a Donald Trump concept of a plan either. I mean an idea of where I want to get to. And it doesn't mean that it's locked in, and you can be flexible along the way. And you might want to have an idea that you want to IPO, or you might want to do a strategic sale at some point, and you can be flexible as to how that goes. But having gone through the grinder, having done it all, having got the clarity that I've got now, having gone down all those blind routes before, and knowing now it's not so much what to do but what not to do. And I'm fortunate because having come back from Europe to here, because I don't really have a network anywhere, having been like literally everywhere, I don't have the traditional network that people have when they grow up and stay in one place all the time. But having come back here to do this, where frankly this is the one country that skins has got the biggest awareness, and so that then opens doors. So I get to have meetings with people that ordinarily I might not be able to get, because a lot of people understand skins and saw the skins journey and have a perception of it as being far more successful and far bigger than it actually was. So in doing that, when I've first, I funded this business personally for 2 years, 3 years. And then when I wanted to raise money, it was 2 years. Then I wanted to get more money in. It wasn't easy, but I was able to engage with people who then had seen what I'd done before, and in a lot of cases they were part of that journey in some way. And it was very easy for them. I like to think it was easy for them to say, yeah, we believe in you and we want to back you. And that comes with enormous responsibility, like huge responsibility. I feel far more responsible for their money than I do with my own. And so when you've got people like that, and we're going through the same thing right now, and I've got enormous support coming from them again for a top-up of $1 million fund. And we haven't launched that yet. That launches next week, that process. And we've already got 600 odd committed now of the $1 million before we've launched it, simply because we went and spoke to several of them and offered them an opportunity to come in on a pre-commitment basis. And that then helps a hell of a lot. And if you respect that and appreciate that, because it doesn't matter how good it is if you haven't got the money to fund it to do the things you need to do. It goes back to that thing I said with skins. If I'd run out of money after having tipped 2.5 in and it needed 5, If I'd run out of money at 2.5, I would have done my dough and walked away. But you've got to stay the course, right? And then when it crosses that line, and then when it explodes, it absolutely explodes. I mean, with Skins, I know it was January 2005. I got the team together and said, I'm a couple of months away from closing the door here. And then, January 2006, because we advertised in 2005. And then, because the previous January we'd done 17 grand in sales and our monthly overheads was 100. Right, so previous Jan did 17. I'd spent $1 million in advertising. Oh my God. And then by the end of January, we'd done 350,000 in revenue. And I went, okay, that's it. In February, I was planning a trip. In March, my main commercial guy and I were in London for 4 weeks, opening up our UK office. I mean, literally in the space of 2 months, we went from me giving everybody 4 weeks notice that if things don't change in 4 weeks, we're shutting. Well, I'm not shutting it down, but I'm firing everybody. I'm going to pare it back to warehouse with shelves with inventory on it and one person who can raise invoices. I've got sales reps out there. They're on commission. We'll get the orders. We'll ship it. We'll get the money, and everybody can get fucked.
Yeah.
And so that's what it was like in January. And in March, we're on a plane going to London to open the UK.
Amazing. You mentioned that you're much better at being able to articulate the destination now, having gone through the previous journey. What does the final destination for EO look like? So
it's hard for me to say because I feel conflicted here. What I definitely want, because I've got approaching 50 investors as it is today. And what I'm desperate to do is to give everybody the opportunity and the availability of liquidity. As a private business that raises money privately, and having done this with Skins, it's very difficult for those investors because they're in and they're trapped. So the best for me is to be listed. And so if whether it's a reverse takeover or an IPO, I'd like to get into a position where, and just because there is a liquidity potential doesn't mean that they have to take it. That's why I like the idea of having a listed vehicle, because not all of us want the money now, and particularly I want to be able to maximize, or I want to be able to work this through and see this thing reach its potential that it's got, and it's got enormous potential what we're doing. So I'd love to see something like that. I'm not wild about the idea of a strategic exit, and certainly not for a long time. I mean, it would have to be something really, really, really stupid. But I do like the idea of that, and then being able to say to all the people that have supported me and have committed, now don't sell, but you can if you want, and you can liquidate if you want, and having the ability to do that, I think, is really important.
Yeah, amazing. Love what you're building. Got to see it firsthand yesterday when we caught up. But Jaimie, I can talk to you for hours, and I know that you've got a plane to catch as well. For anyone that wants to find out more about EO, get in touch, say hello, what's the best way?
Okay, so a couple of things. Our website is eolab.com, eolab.com. You can get me on LinkedIn. Jaimie is Jaimie, Fuller, Fuller. You can message me. I interact with people all the time. Anybody that's, not cold calling, not even cold calling, but, these mass pitches you get on LinkedIn I'm not interested in, but people contact me all the time and I respond and hand up my email address and we can chat. So, yeah, but eolab.com is the one. And I think our handle on Instagram and social media is EO Sports Lab. So if you want to follow us on Instagram, you can.
Perfect. I will make sure all of those links are in the show notes. Jaimie, once again, thank you for being so open and for coming on the podcast and sharing everything about your journey.
Thank you, Rohit. Thanks for having me.
Cheers. Thanks for listening to episode 199 of the Startup Playbook podcast. As always, full show notes from this interview will be available at startupplaybook.co. I'll be back next week with another episode, but in the meantime, if you enjoyed this interview, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. As always, thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next week.